So this week has not been great so far. And in the spirit of naming something, acknowledging it, and hopefully releasing it, I want to talk about the ways in which Booktube has been bad for my reading. So I've been on Booktube since June of 2020, which isn't that long as compared to how long the platform has been around or how long other people have been making videos, but something I've noticed specifically in the past month when I've been uploading a lot more frequently and watching a lot more Booktube content are the kind of subtle, nefarious ways that the pressures that come from not just creating content on Booktube, but watching other people's content has negatively affected my reading. And the first is the pressure to have themed reads. I am a mood reader. I am constantly reading books of different genres, from different types of authors, fiction, nonfiction, biography, etc. However, as a viewer, I'm normally watching videos that are themed. It's, I read only books with red covers, or I read every novel written by Colleen Hoover, or I read books that had this specific trope, whether it was enemies to lovers, or whether it was gray moral anti-heroes. And I understand from like a marketing perspective how, in terms of like key terms and buzzwords and titles, that can be a really enticing idea. I mean, just look at the popularity of I read like blank for a week, insert popular celebrity here. But also as a viewer, I can understand how kind of making a challenge out of your reading could be entertaining as opposed to maybe just watching a regular wrap up. That being said, I am a classic mood reader. I mean, if you watch my last video on what I'm currently reading, I have fiction and nonfiction and classics and erotica, and it's all over the place. So in general, it's kind of hard for me to like read what I want to read and then go back, look at my Goodreads list and try to see where those things fit in. At the same time, I don't read very quickly, or rather, I don't read very quickly as compared to the average booktuber. In my own life, everyone marvels at how fast I read for reading, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 books a month, which absolutely is on the low end of the average booktuber, or at least the ones that I see pop up on my For You page. Now, in general, I don't really feel any tension about that. I've really never felt any pressure to read faster. But because I'm not reading that many books a month, and I'm also not great at like planning videos out or planning themed reads out, I find myself struggling a little bit when I want to make a video that has a through line, that has a thesis, as opposed to here are 4 or 5 books that I've read over the past 2.5 months. So that's something that I've really been kind of struggling with in the last couple weeks, this idea of, does everything need to have a theme, or can it just be like, hey, here are the 4 books I read in the past 6 weeks? So that's one. Another thing I find kind of challenging is the idea that in order to have content to make, you have to have a certain number of books read. Now, in general, I think the average kind of folk wisdom on Booktube is that videos that have more than 1 book in them are more popular, more entertaining, more accessible than videos that only have 1 book in them. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the odds of a viewer reading the exact same book that you read, especially if it's not something that's, a New York Times bestseller, are pretty low. But when you have a collection of books that you can talk about, there are different access points. And also you have this culture on Booktube in which, again, the folk wisdom, I'm saying that because I don't know if anybody's actually done any studies on this, is that single book reviews, period, whether it's a very popular book or a lesser known backlist book, are not going to be as successful. All that being said, I have noticed that those concerns have led me to avoid longer books, which is so sad. I recently just started rereading Pachinko, which is one of my favorite books in the year I read it, that I have yet to reread. And I'm someone who loves to reread books, because in my mind, I'm like, well, if I'm spending all this time rereading this 500-something page book, it's gonna take me a while to finish it. It's not gonna fit in with like the rest of the reading. Again, you have the theme reading thing here, and it's a reread anyway. So people who are familiar with my previous videos mentioning it aren't gonna be interested. But why should that matter when it's a book that I love and I'm only 8 chapters in and I'm already reminded of how much I love it? One of the reasons I made a what I'm reading right now video, even though I've never made one before, was because I am reading Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Brown, a long book. I am reading Dune by Frank Herbert, a long book. And I was thinking, wow, if I wait until I've completely finished these texts before I talk about it, am not going to have much to talk about on this channel. In addition, especially with books like Adrienne Marie Brown's Pleasure Activism that are nonfiction, I read slower when I'm reading nonfiction. Whether I mean to or not, it just takes me more time to like process and ingest, and I will like read something on the page and like look off in the distance and like meditate on it. Like, it's just a different experience. And I was surprised at how many people seem to enjoy that video, so I'll try to keep that in mind in the future. But avoiding long books is a really sad way to live your life, in my opinion, because there are so many long books that I want to read that seem really interesting, like The Once and Future King, and there's long books that I already know I love, like Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, that I want to experience again and, get new insights, and by reading a book at a different stage of my life, have new things to talk about. So that's another way I've noticed that Booktube has been bad for my reading. Another way that I've noticed that it's been bad for my reading is the ways in which Booktube sometimes isn't about reading. And this one probably is more of like channel focused and actually reading focused, but I'm someone who truly genuinely enjoys diving into my text critically. I love trying to connect it to different things I'm learning in my life. I love trying to connect it to things that I've read by that author or things by other authors, and that's just how I process. I am not prioritizing that over anybody else's method of reviewing books. But what that means is, if I engage with a book that I don't want to talk about in that way, I'm simply not going to talk about it. And just to give you a specific example, Kindred by Octavia Butler is one of the best books I've ever read. However, it was so heavy and so intense and impacted me so deeply, I didn't feel at the time that I read it last year that I could really break it down and interrogate it in the way I like to do other books. So I mentioned it in passing, but I didn't really talk about it. On the flip side, I have recently started to get into Korean manhwa, and not to imply that just because a text has, pictures or drawings in it, that makes it any less rigorous or any less impactful, but I've been enjoying those more for like light reading. I've been enjoying those stories as kind of something simple and sweet. There absolutely are, horror, psychological thriller, intense historical fiction type stories in manhwa, but I've been avoiding those. I've been intentionally reading like light, fluffy stories just to kind of give my brain a break and to kind of give my emotions a chance to connect to something that isn't necessarily like really heavy and deep and hard hitting. There are absolutely people on this platform who talk really intelligently about the manhwa or the manga that they read. And again, I want to emphasize that I think those styles of literature are absolutely worth exploring and celebrating. But for me, when I'm reading them, that is my turn off your brain, just have fun and enjoy the nice stories and pretty pictures time. So if I spend an entire Saturday reading Korean manhwa, I have nothing to talk about the next week on my channel, because that's just not work that I really want to interrogate in that way. And while I don't think there's anything wrong with just saying, here's something I read and I liked it and I hope you like it too, that to me is not really my style of making content. And in general, when I'm watching other people's videos, I find that style to be unsatisfying. Now, I don't want to get down the whole rabbit hole of like reading for pleasure versus reading to learn or reading for critical thinking and, these really intense binaries and these conversations that seem so cyclical on the platform. I'm just saying, for me, the type of content I like making and the type of content I enjoy watching usually is a bit more rigorous than simply, this is the book, this is why I did or did not like it. And when I am reading stuff that I feel like I am not ready to kind of break down publicly, or when I'm reading stuff that I simply don't want to think about that deeply, I am left in a position where it's like, what am I going to film about this week? Because I do enjoy filming. I don't make any money from this. Like, the reason I do this is because I like it, but I'm not going to make a video I'm not proud of simply to have content to put up. And that's why I be so sporadic. I'll do a video every week for 4 weeks, and then I'll go ghost for 5 months. And it is what it is, and completely ignoring the idea of like, oh, the algorithm, and if you leave YouTube for a while, people aren't going to watch your videos. Ignoring that, I'm just thinking about the fact that I seem to have found a hobby, making YouTube videos, that is intrinsically linked to a separate hobby, reading. And sometimes I do think that, maybe if I did another type of video, maybe if I talked about movies or anime, or maybe if, I'm not going to vlog. I was about to say it, but I'm not going to vlog it. But maybe if I did something such as vlogging, something that provided, more copious content with perhaps less work, since I got to, live my life anyway, it would be a little different. But at this stage, that's not what I'm interested in. And so that's just something I've noticed, like kind of like an additional pressure to read, even no matter what's going on the rest of my life, or else I won't have content for Booktube. Another way that I think Booktube has been bad for my reading is sometimes when I am reading a book, I am already thinking about how I will talk about it, as opposed to just living in the story. So that doesn't happen with every book, but I am not someone in general in my personal life who enjoys highlighting or underlining or doing notations or tabs. That's just not my style of reading, whether we're talking about reading for school or reading for fun. So when I'm reading a book and I get to a point where I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, or that's really awful, like I want to make sure I make a note of that so I can talk about in the video, and I put my phone down, or I put my book down and I get my phone out and I like type the page number or like take a little note, like that pulls me out of the story. And that's on me. That is on me again, because when I review books, I want to be able to give like specific examples of things, but I'm finding that sometimes I have to remind myself that it's okay to just sit and read the book and just be invested in the story, for better or for worse, and then kind of do your thinking afterwards, if that makes sense. And I do this with movies sometimes too, because I love talking about movies with my friends. When I watch a film, usually the first time I watch it, I am just experiencing it and then seeing what jumps out at me. And then the second time I watch it, because pretty much every movie I've ever seen, I've seen at least twice, actually no, there's even movies I hated, I've watched a second time because I'm like, but why did I hate it? That's just the way I am. But with books, it's a lot harder to do that because it takes a lot more time in terms of the time you spend with the book, even if it's a shorter book, but also each time you process it, it's going to come across a little differently. I have found that when I have reread books, even if I reread them within a couple months of each other, my experience can be so different as opposed to when I'm rewatching movies, because I think of the layers of subjectivity that come when individuals are reading words on a page, as opposed to all of the additional information you're getting visually and with sound effects and with the actors' faces in a film. So another way Booktube has been bad for my reading is that sometimes I am of two minds when I am reading. I am thinking about how I will talk about it, and I'm just trying to enjoy it. So a little disclaimer before I end this video, I'm in no way blaming specific booktubers or upset with the platform of Booktube when I talk about some of these downsides. This is more of just a list of things that I do think I experienced in my first year of Booktube, just because I wasn't uploading as consistently, it didn't feel as potent. Really, in the last month, I've noticed a lot more of these things creeping up. And the reason I wanted to bring them up is, as I said, name it, acknowledge it, release it. Hopefully this will help get some of this off my chest. I want to bring it up in hopes that if someone else has these experiences, they can maybe identify it a bit and see that it's not just them. But also because I think sometimes it's nice to kind of peek behind the curtain a bit. None of what we, and I say we just as in anybody who makes, videos on YouTube, none of what we're doing is it's not rocket science. We're not saving anybody's lives. I don't mean to compare us to Oz behind the curtain, but sometimes I do think it is important to pull back the curtain a little bit and show, sometimes including something new in your life, such as making YouTube videos or learning to talk to an audience, is going to also have a few downsides. As one of my favorite philosophers said in their seminal text, She's All That, when you open yourself up to people, sometimes you let the good in with the bad, sometimes you let the bad in with the good. And I feel like my experience with Booktube and making videos has been overwhelmingly positive, but as I've been doing more and more of it frequently in the past month, I do think I'm noticing a little more of that bad that is seeping through. So those are just some of the ways in which Booktube has been bad for my reading, but hopefully with this little public confession, they will no longer be quite as annoying. And as always, I will see you next time, and I hope you have a good day.